find out how you can help your children. Just one comment. You were talking about the discrimination you experienced as a child. I've been doing this issue, comprehensive sex ed, in our schools for the last 25, almost 30 years now. And not just the sex ed, but other aspects of education that conflict with our traditional faiths. And I've had many situations where Christian children, during reading time, wanted to bring their Bible to school to read during silent reading, and were sent to the office. So I'm delighted to be here with you because I think we have a common mission. And thank you, Javed, for your vision of changing education. About 25 years ago, I was in my classrooms. I had a specialty program. I had kids coming into me from all over the school board for my specialty program. And during certain times of the year, the kids would start saying sexual terms and calling one another sexual terms. What's going on? And they said, oh, it's sex ed, sir. So I wonder what's happening with sex ed. So I went in, I sat in on some classes. Grade 7 students watching the videos, boys, 3/4 of them with their head down because they weren't ready for this information. This was being imposed upon them. I said, where's this coming from? What is the research to support this? Well, today I'm going to share you a little bit about that there really is no research. And anyway, let me go on. First of all, let's see. Oh, there we go. What am I going to do today? We're going to basically ask the question, is youth sex a risk? Because comprehensive sex ed, I've been getting phone calls from Javed, from people all over the province talking about what their children are being exposed to in sex ed classes. So we're just going to answer the question, is youth sex a risk? Comprehensive sex ed, why should we be concerned? And how did the curriculum get to our schools? And lastly, if we're concerned, how should we respond? I'd like to start with this analogy. We have programs, instead of comprehensive sex ed, we have sexual risk avoidance programs happening, and we use this curriculum called Heritage Keepers, and we have programs. This program is being used in the United States, South Carolina, Texas. I have a large program going on in Hawaii, and I like to start off, especially in Hawaii, with this illustration. What is the goal of a parent? Well, we need to take our kids from the island of childhood to the shoreline of adulthood, where we can help where our kids are going to maybe go to university, college, begin a trade, a career, start a family, and achieve their spiritual goals. Unfortunately, we have to get them through the risky waters of the youth years, where sex, drugs, alcohol, and pornography can interfere with them achieving their goals. When we say, what are the risks of youth sex? People always think of the physical risks, pregnancy and sexually transmitted infections. But the school says, well, you can take care of that by using a condom. Unfortunately, what the school doesn't tell our children is that condoms only reduce the risk. And if you look at this chart, for some of the sexually transmitted infections, it only reduces the risk by 30%. Our children aren't told this. Aside from physical risks, there are many other risks: social, emotional, spiritual. Youth sexual activity has been shown to lead to patterns of failed relationships. When you start having failed relationships as a teen, those relationship failures continue through adulthood. Poor family relationships in your own family continues also into adulthood. Reduced academic achievement. Youth who wait, focus on school, focus on getting a job, they actually end up earning more over their lifetime. Regret for sexual activity leads to increased depression. Increased suicide rates. Females that are sexually active are 3 times more likely to commit suicide. Males are 8 times more likely. Increased exposure to crime, sexual exploitation, and, as I said, reduced economic achievement. And a condom doesn't reduce these risks. These are often life consequences. But the research shows that youth who avoid sexual activity have better current and future physical, emotional, relational, and economic health, and they have reduced exposure to drugs, alcohol, crime, domestic violence, etc. If we can teach our kids to avoid sex, guess what? They avoid pornography. They avoid drugs. They avoid alcohol as well. Well, okay, youth sex can be a risk. Are youth engaging in sex? Pediatric Society of Canada did this survey of students. 14-year-olds, grade 9. 9% have engaged in intercourse. 30% oral sex, 67% deep kissing, and 61% sexual touch above the waist and 53% sexual touch below the waist. As students mature, you see the 16-year-old age group, sexual activity does increase. So yes, some of our kids, many, are in some ways sexually active. I tried to do some research to find out sexual activity of high school Muslim youth. I could not find that, but I did find this. Muslim college students, 54% of them have engaged in sexual premarital sex. And there is no statistical difference between males and females. So if youth sex is a risk and youth are being sexually active, what are the approaches that we can use to guide them? Well, there are 2 approaches. One is called sexual risk avoidance, which is more of an abstinence-based approach. It says youth sex is a risk, and the goal is to equip youth to protect their future by understanding the negative impact of youth sex and developing the skills to avoid sex until marriage. That's more of an abstinence approach. I think the approach that most of you would want your children to be involved with. Second approach is called comprehensive sex ed. And comprehensive sex ed says that no, people are sexual from birth. Sex is a human right. My apologies, the word right was missing. All ages, all orientations, all identities. And since youth sex can be a risk, then we have to help our people reduce risk by teaching how to use condoms. So the goal of comprehensive sex ed is to equip youth to have satisfying sexual relations and reduce risk whenever they feel ready to engage in sex. Those are our 2 broad approaches. What are the concerns with comprehensive sex ed? Again, this is not just specific to Canada, to Ontario. This is an international concern. So I thought I'd bring this 10-minute video because it is an international video on comprehensive sex ed and what are the concerns.
This is definitely an attack. It will affect your child rearing. It will affect your education system.
This is instructions for the teacher in the classroom to ask her or his students, how do people express their sexual feelings? What is abstinence? And here are some answers. Oral sex, masturbation, anal sex, massage, holding hands, touching each other's genitals, saying, I like you. And what they're doing is equating all these things. Saying, I like you is equal to anal sex.
It is pornography. Men, especially on the house floor, did not want to look at. We couldn't show this on the television news, but yet we want our 4th grade children to be looking at this book.
In the name of sexuality education, children are seeing obscene materials that have been ruled by Congress and by the Supreme Court impossible to show to children.
An online CSE program for African youth called The World Starts With Me tells children that sexuality includes oral sex and masturbation. It then tells them it's their own choice if they want to lose their virginity. It shows children pictures of naked girls and boys in various stages of development, and then asks them to point out differences in their private parts. Parents likely will never know, as it is all done online away from home.
They have elementary students as young as 9 years old. Then they teach them how to wear a condom. And they have this plastic genitalia, and they even have young girls. They're teaching them how to put a condom on a male genitalia and boys how to put a condom on a women's genitalia without the knowledge and consent of the parents.
They're giving them handouts, negotiating sexual encounters with other students. For example, there are statements like this: can I take your shirt off? It makes me hot when you touch me here. Is it okay if I take my pants off?
Where we in Latin America, we still have a lot of poverty. We have communities that don't have fresh water, that don't have electricity. Focus is completely shifted from basic needs. They get comprehensive sexual education without the consent of parents, taking and deconstructing the family.
My brother Luigi and I had an opportunity to go to the United Nations and give a speech on the UN floor. I told them how Planned Parenthood was passing out a booklet for HIV positive youth at the United Nations called Healthy, Happy, and Hot. This is for the kids who have AIDS. It teaches about sexual pleasure through masturbation, with same-sex partners, and even if you are drunk.
This pamphlet called Healthy, Happy, and Hot tells young people that you have the right not to disclose your HIV status to a sexual partner if you're not comfortable. It also tells young people that are HIV positive that if they decide with their partner not to wear a condom, that's their decision.
The World Health Organization standards for sexuality education in Europe actually suggest that children ages 0 to 4 should be given information about masturbation and given the right to explore their gender identity. For ages 4 to 6, children should be taught about same-sex relationships and respect for different norms regarding sexuality.
The interests of organizations like UNFPA and IPPF is to get parents out of the picture and to radicalize and sexualize children.
UNFPA has tried to convince my country to change our positions on issues such as reproductive rights and comprehensive sexuality education. Madam Chair, does the UNFPA think it can do this because Nauru is the smallest member state of the United Nations?
The Nigerian government was actually told by the Western countries that if they do not give in, that they will be denied foreign aid.
On page 89 of a UNICEF-published Sexual and Reproductive Health Manual, UNICEF listed situations in which one can obtain sexual pleasure that included sexual responses directed towards inanimate objects, animals, minors, and non-consenting persons. Some of the objectives of the UNESCO Sexuality Education Guidelines include teaching children at age 9 about sexual stimulation and the definition and function of orgasm, and at age 15, that both men and women can receive sexual pleasure with a partner of the same or opposite sex. The It's All One curriculum, also promoted by International Planned Parenthood, reveals the multiple manipulative tactics used to indoctrinate and sexualize children through CSE. Like other CSE programs, It's All One claims, among other things, to be evidence-based, comprehensive, human rights, gender-sensitive, and culturally appropriate education that will increase young people's responsible decision-making, to reduce adolescent rates of pregnancy and sexually transmitted infections, including HIV. It's All One, however, like most CSE programs, is really just cleverly disguised abortion rights, sexual pleasure education, masquerading as human rights, gender, and sexual and reproductive health education. It aggressively promotes abortion. With over 112 references to abortion, It's All One has an obsessive focus on sexual pleasure, mentioning sexual pleasure 62 times. It promotes multiple sex acts and instructs children on how to stimulate themselves or their partner to orgasm. To explore their readiness, children fill out a worksheet that infers children are ready to have sex when you are feeling sexually attracted to the other person, and when you're feeling comfortable about telling the other person what feels good sexually. It teaches that human rights encompass sexual rights, including alleged rights to all persons to sexual expression and the right to seek sexual pleasure. Hooking children on sex is a multi-billion-dollar business for Planned Parenthood and other similar organizations. This is because children, or prospects, once sexualized, become Planned Parenthood customers, dependent upon their services.
In the context of the Sustainable Development Goals, that determines the agenda for the next 15 years. The voice is very, very biased. It's just International Planned Parenthood Federation and their affiliates. We have a direct influence on the outcome documents, on what is established, what is negotiated at the UN.
Comprehensive sexuality education programs are disguised under many names. They may be called comprehensive sex or sexual education, education on human sexuality, reproductive health education, information on sexual and reproductive health, family life education, teen pregnancy prevention, rape prevention, anti-bullying programs, HIV/AIDS prevention, and sometimes even abstinence or abstinence plus education. CSE programs usually falsely claim to be age-appropriate, evidence-based, healthy sexuality education that will prevent teen pregnancy, sexual abuse, STDs, and HIV.
One of the handouts that concerns me the most is called the Genderbread Person. They teach that gender is a spectrum, that you can choose to be whatever you want. You could be all female one day, and the next day feel like you're neither female or male.
Frankly, it's confusing. It's a mental molestation. We're confusing these kids as to what they are. From a medical perspective, when sexual freedom is the priority, then sexual health is going to suffer. There are laws in Oregon where children as young as 15 can get taxpayer-funded sex changes without parental consent. You can't have an aspirin at school without parental consent. However, a student could make these life-altering, permanent decisions without their parental knowledge or consent.
Sexual rights, sexual education movements began with Dr. Alfred C. Kinsey. Kinsey actually had pedophiles measure with a stopwatch how many children could achieve what he called orgasms within a 24-hour period. Today, comprehensive sexuality education is based on this philosophy that children are sexual from birth, created by Kinsey.
Say no to CSE! Say no to CSE!
We've got to stop it. We've got to use everything at our disposal. We have to stand together to stop this attack against our children.
And they have all this funding and this organization, but we know that if we stand together, we can do something for the family, for the children.
We stopped the Kinsey sexuality education program in Croatia.
It is time for parents to say, no, my family is mine. My wife is mine. I am hers. Our children are ours.
Band together and find ways to stop it from entering your country.
Men have to rise up, defend their family. On matters sexual, the fathers have got to stand up. Say, you have no place talking sexuality to my children. We resist it, even with our lives, because that's what life is all about.
It's happening on our watch. If we don't do something about it, it is all of us that carry that guilt.
To learn more and to sign the petition to stop comprehensive sexuality education, go to stopcse.org. Together, we can and will protect the world's children.
And I'm so happy that you guys are here because you want to band together. And I hope we can band together with many more people. But where did this come from? How did it get to Canada? You heard many, many times the term Planned Parenthood. There are multiple sources pressing comprehensive sex ed into all countries. And here in Canada, into all provinces and all schools. There's international pressure. There's also changing social values, which has a huge impact, and legislative changes. Let's look at some of that. Is it okay if I use this microphone? Yeah, thank you. Great, international pressure. First of all, Planned Parenthood partners with the World Health Organization and United Nations. Planned Parenthood is the World Health Organization's advisor on sex education, on sexual health. So that information goes from Planned Parenthood, the World Health Organization, then the United Nations takes that information and says to member countries, this is what sexual health is supposed to look like. So, and Canada is signed on as a member nation. They accept those, and then Canada then takes that information and gives it to an organization called CCAN. CCAN stands for the Sexual Education, the Sexual Information and Education Council of Canada. It was founded in 1964 in Canada by who? International Planned Parenthood. It is a subsidiary of Planned Parenthood, okay? And when they established it, Planned Parenthood didn't have enough money. So where did they get their money from? Playboy. Hugh Hefner, Playboy magazine, funded it. Because they want to change the sexual values of the culture. CCAN then develops this document, and I have a copy of it here. This is the Canadian Guidelines for Sexual Health Education. Those guidelines, and these are the most recent ones, then go to where? Well, to our provinces. And the provinces then take that and turn that into curriculum. Now, the provinces do have the authority to limit the amount used and in the curriculum, but that's the process. What about the changing social values? You know, when did sex ed start here in Canada? Well, back in the 1900s, early 1900s, between 1900 and 1930, we had a problem. I'm sure you guys had problems in your original countries as well. Syphilis and gonorrhea were rampant, there was no cure, and here in Canada, contraceptives were illegal. So, the government says, what are we going to do? Well, government said, we need to teach our kids to abstain from sex until when? Marriage. It wasn't based on religion. It was a policy decided for health purposes. Well, abstinence sex ed continued right through until about the 1980s in Canada. But during that time, you heard about Alfred Kinsey. Alfred Kinsey, I don't want to go into a lot of detail, we don't have time, but he was funded by the Rockefeller Foundation in 1941 to do some sex ed research. 1941, now, Kinsey was a bisexual, married, and he shared with his wife, these are how I feel, what are we going to do? And she said, let's have open relationships, and they both were openly bisexual. And and he was a professor at Indiana State University, and at one conference he said, you know, it's unfortunate that we don't have as much information about sexual health. And so the Rockefeller Foundation said, well, let's fund that. 1941, what he wanted to do was survey people and to get that sexual baseline. What are the experiences you've had? What do you like? What don't you like? Well, guess what? Where were all the men? They were in war. and the women were in the factories, he could not get individuals to survey. So he went to the prisons, he went to the sex workers on the street, and the pedophiles to get his data. That's what his information was based on. And he wrote a document in 1948, and that document was embraced by the universities. And that's how the philosophy, the academic philosophies in education started changing. And it all goes back to Kinsey and Planned Parenthood. All right. Then we had the sexual revolution in the 60s and the 70s. By the time we got to the 1980s and the early 90s, we had a problem. We had the HIV/AIDS crisis. Sexually transmitted infections were increasing. The government's saying, what are we going to do? Planned Parenthood, through SICAS, which had been established in 1964, said, we've got an answer. Let's change the sex ed curriculum so that we can add condoms so that kids can be protected. And then legislative changes resulted in further changes that affirmed that direction. Okay? Another thing that happened during that time, at the beginning of the 1930s through the 1950s and early 60s, we had fairly conservative values. But those values over time started to dwindle. In the early 30s, not very many people embraced liberal values, but as time went on, those liberal values became stronger, and more people embraced them. So, comprehensive sex ed came in. What were some of those legislative changes? I know when Javid called me, he says, we need to know about those legislative changes that, that hold this in place. Well, in 1996, the Canadian Human Rights Act wrote in sexual orientation was added as one of the prohibited forms of discrimination. Then, 2005, Canada legalized same-sex marriage. Well, if you're going to legalize same-sex marriage, doesn't the curriculum have to reflect that? And that's the argument. 2012, the Ontario Human Rights Code then prohibits discrimination for sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. And then following that, Kathleen Wynne passes Ontario Bill 13, the Accepting Schools Act, and that says, yeah, we want a positive, safe school environment. We all want that. But it put a focus on homophobia, transphobia, biphobia, sexual orientations, etc. And then it also mandated the establishment of gay straight alliance clubs in schools, these would be clubs that would raise awareness and plant the seeds about sexual orientation, gender identity, etc. So in 2015, what happens? We get the comprehensive sex ed curriculum. And that's just a general outline of some of the concerns with it. I'm not going to go through it right now. But after the comprehensive sex ed curriculum is in place, what happened just recently last year? Bill C4, conversion therapy. Conversion therapy says this: it is illegal to try and counsel a person to change sexual orientation or gender identity. So, here's the problem. Most people interpret this as, no, you're talking about going into paid therapy. It could be, but it's not very clear. So if you have a child and the school is teaching sexual orientation to the kids and that you have the right to, and your child starts to think, I think I might be gay, I might be homosexual, I might be a lesbian. As a parent, can you counsel that child to change their decision? Under the criminal code, we may get some cases of parents in court. So let's look at some of the curriculum. Grade 1, labeling the genitalia. I don't have a problem with kids knowing the names of the body parts, even the genitalia. I do have a problem with this being done in a mixed class setting with boys and girls. It reduces modesty. And I've spoken in places all across this country, And teachers tell me it's led to reduced modesty, and it's led to increased investigation on the playground of the kids' genitalia and body parts. Grade 2-3, we're starting to open the door on sexual orientation and gender identity. And this next video shows you what it looks like in the classroom.
A family can be made up in many different ways.
It's called SOGI, for Sexual Orientation and Gender Identification, a curriculum that teaches public school students across Canada to celebrate the homosexual lifestyle and that gender is fluid. In other words, your gender is not dependent on what parts you were born with, but rather what you feel like in the moment.
There's people that are boys, there's people that are girls. There are people whose gender might be a little bit of both or might even be neither.
Lessons include books about transgender children, such as 10,000 Dresses, and songs like the Rainbow Song.
Gender won't decide the choices we make. Some boys like dressing up, some girls like catching snakes.
The SOGI curriculum started in British Columbia in 2016 and is quickly spreading throughout Canada.
I just thought, who decided that this was okay to teach our children?
Author and inspirational speaker Laura Lynn Tyler Thompson is a leading voice against the SOGI curriculum.
And we are seeing the results of that now because some kids are reacting very emotionally and saying, and they're in fear. Will I suddenly struggle with feeling like a different gender inside of my body?
Carrie Simpson of Culture Guard, another leading opponent, calls the curriculum nothing short of child abuse.
All those beautiful qualities that make young girls, beautiful girls and women, are being basically vilified. The things that make our boys boys are being, taken from them. So things of equating young men to being strong protectors is something that's now evil.
But Morgan Auger, a transsexual and supporter, claims it's about acceptance, not indoctrination.
The idea is to teach kids that there are gay kids and there are trans kids and there are trans parents and gay parents in our society, and everybody's wanted and desired. After all, that's what our Human Rights Code says, and it's the role of schools to teach the following of our laws, right?
Simpson disagrees, saying she sees SOGI's real goal as
altering our culture from a heteronormative society into one where anything goes, no boundaries, no values, no morals. It's a hedonistic cult, basically, what they're implying.
Another blaring example, drag queen story time. It's happening in Canada and America, where some public schools and libraries invite drag queens, some dressed like horned demons, to read to young children.
And it's a social deconstructionist agenda. They're using children, little 5-year-olds, to accomplish this. And parents are waking up and saying no.
When asked about parents' rights, Auger says,
well, actually, in Canada, parents' rights are limited and children's rights are put ahead. So the child has the right to be protected from the parents when the parents behave badly.
Canada is known as one of the most gay-friendly countries in the world, with many of their largest cities featuring their own gay villages, like here in Vancouver, which has literally rolled out the Rainbow Road.
Most gays, like village resident Dave Davy DiCarlo, support SOGI and limiting parental rights.
The change that we have to see is sometimes the parents, and the kids are doing actually really okay.
This is very scary stuff.
Longtime Vancouver area pastor Kevin Kavanaugh says this is far more serious than most Canadian Christians realize.
Our problem is not the teachers, the educators, the administrators. This is a battle in the heavenlies.
He says Satan is going after their most vulnerable, the children.
And the little girl came home in tears because the teacher had told her, since she was playing with some toys in the class that were deemed to be masculine in nature, that she was likely a boy in a girl's body. The mother went to the school the very next day, and instead of having any sort of tolerance or support or understanding, she was actually called names. She was told that she was a homophobe, that she was a bigot.
With that in mind, Tyler Thompson, Simpson, and Pastor Kevin are spreading their message across social media and in town hall meetings. The pro-gay backlash has been fierce.
And the hatred and the anger and the bullying that came against us, even though we said, we love you, we don't take from you the opportunity and the freedom to live as you choose. We love you, but we do not agree with you.
Pastor Kevin believes Canadian Christians are in a 2 Chronicles 20 moment.
The word was this battle is not yours, Jehoshaphat. This battle is the Lord's.
And the church is beginning to prepare for what it takes to fight for our kids.
So, children's rights are above parents' rights. You saw this book on the video. I have a copy of it. If you want to look at it, it'll be at my table. But these are in all of the schools, all the classrooms. This is only one book. There are now hundreds of books about different topics, including and story books and picture books about masturbation, etc., for children. And the other thing that the school boards are doing, they are removing all books from the libraries before the year 2010 because the values may not be consistent with the new liberal values of today. So, continue with the curriculum. Grade 5, 6, we need to build sexuality conference. How are we going to do that? Through masturbation. And kids are told that this is perfectly fine. This is how you can find out what you like and don't like sexually. Through skills of consent. Being able to, as you saw in the video, negotiate. What would you like to do? Can I take your shirt off? You make me hot when. And to make sure that people are consenting. And then how to end a relationship. Yes, if kids are going to start relationships early, they're going to have many sexual relationships before marriage. So they need to learn how to end their relationships in an amicable manner. Wouldn't it be far better to ask the students, what would the characteristics be, what characteristics would you like to see in a person that you would like to spend the rest of your life with, instead of how to end the relationship? By the time they get to grade 7, ways to show affection, holding hands, anal, oral, penile, vaginal, self and mutual masturbation. Abstinence is redefined by this time. Abstinence does not mean avoiding all sexual activities. Abstinence is a personal definition. It's what you like or what you do not like to do. That's your definition of abstinence. That's what abstinence means. And when it comes to sexting, instead of saying to the kids, all sexting is bad, sending sexual messages and pictures, it says to the kids, you know, sending sexual messages can be a little dangerous. You know, if somebody sends you a sexual message, somebody sends you a sexual picture of themselves, let's be kind to them. Let's not send it on. So what are we teaching? We're teaching the etiquette of sexting. Why is that? Well, because if kids satisfy themselves through masturbation over the internet or over the cell phones, what's happening? They're not exchanging body fluids, they're not exchanging disease. So it's seen as another way of healthily engaging in relationship. Consent for sex, confidence with contraceptives is another focus. And then by the time they get to grade 8, all of the above is reinforced, and the kids by this time are supposed to develop their gender identity is taught, and they're supposed to develop their sexual health plan. By this time, decide what they like and they do not like sexually. And it's okay. They do say, you know, the healthiest thing to do is, you know, to avoid all sexual activity. But that's a very, very small percentage of the whole curriculum. All right. So did CSE reduce teen sexual activity? CSE is started in about the mid-1990s, 1997. We started bringing condoms into the schools. Official curriculum changed 2015. Since that time, what's happened? Well, this research was done not too long ago, just about a year and a half ago, and they looked at the 103 comprehensive sex ed studies that the comprehensive sex ed uses to say, here, look at these 103 studies, they lead to positive results, so we need to have comprehensive sex ed in the schools. This agency, the Institute for Research and Evaluation, is an agency that looks at research that's been done and find out if it's been done properly. Of the 103 studies that are used internationally, only 6 showed an improvement in students' sexual behavior. 17 of them showed negative effects. In other words, increased sexual activity. And there was no evidence of increased condom use whatsoever. Conclusion: comprehensive sex ed is ineffective in the US and international classrooms, but they said, because they did research on this, there is evidence for sexual risk avoidance, and it looks promising. Did CSE reduce teen sex? Well, teen STI rates in that time period, since we've been having comprehensive sex ed, teen sexually transmitted infection rates have gone up 138%. That's for chlamydia. When it comes to syphilis, it's gone up over 900%. Teen sexual activities, therefore, it looks like it has gone up. And we also know that depression and other negative consequences within our youth have increased over that time. The alternative for sexual risk avoidance, or since that time when we started examining the research in the last 10 years or so, the abstinence people said, okay, we need to tune up our sexual risk avoidance, our abstinence curriculum. They shifted to sexual risk avoidance. They created new curriculum. They scientifically tested it, and it's shown to reduce sexual activity, reduce pregnancy, reduce STIs within our youth, and it's caught the attention of the US government, and the interest is shifting from comprehensive sex ed to sexual risk avoidance. The government is funding, the government funds my research work, or all of our work in Hawaii. Then we're reaching at-risk, we're reaching homeless kids with this message. And they're saying, why didn't somebody tell me about this before? The homeless kids. So, and schools are embracing it. How should we respond? Does this make you upset? Does this upset you? That this is what kids are exposed to? How should we respond? You know, we could put the boxing gloves on and the protest signs and things like that, and I think we need to communicate that way, but I think we also need to engage. We need to be involved. The reality is we live in a multi-worldview society right now. And if we think we're going to change that, it's going to take a long time. Because comprehensive sex ed did not come overnight. It took 50 years. Actually 60 years since Kinsey. Okay? Some families are accepting of the comprehensive sex ed training. Other families think that comprehensive sex ed is in conflict with the teachings of the home, and they feel that the government is actually indoctrinating their children, and they're really upset about it. But the schools are in a tough spot, because with all of the legislation, etc., they're mandated to have what they call now keep in mind, an inclusive education environment. I'm going to ask you a question. Do you think if we put together a team, we could use that terminology to our advantage in the public schools? We want to help you make an inclusive education environment. Can we share with you what the learning needs are of our kids? And oh, by the way, can we help you in your school? I'm sorry, how's my time going, Javed? Because I want to tell a story because I think this is really important. We doing okay? Okay, short story. All right, I have a pastor. My pastor, who used to be in Hamilton, moved here to Brampton, moved to Brampton. He'd been working with me on all this for a number of years. The first day he got into his church office, what did he do? He walks down the street to the school, goes in and says to the principal, "Hey, can we go out for lunch sometime?" The principal says, "Sure." Take him out for lunch and says, "What can we do to help out the school? We're in this community, you have our kids, we love the kids in the community, what can we do to help your," and the principal just about fell on the floor. He started building relationship. They had volunteers in the school. Started building relationship. And then when Pink Shirt Day came up, Pink Shirt Day, you know, where it's supposed to be anti-bullying, and the LGBT community came in, and all they talked about was sexual orientation, gender identity, lesbianism, et cetera, et cetera. Principal, the pastor went to the principal next day and said, "You know, I'm really glad you have a Pink Shirt Day for bullying. But do you think we could broaden this to bully for the kid that comes from another country, the one that wears a hijab, the adult that has no hair? Do you think we could broaden this?" The principal says, "Yeah, I think it'd be a good idea." He says, "Could my church write the program for you?" For the next 5 years, they ran the Pink Shirt Day in the school. We can influence, that's how we do it. Okay. Here we go. How should we respond? Well, there are basically three things we can do. One, we can leave the public school system. I have had many Muslim families go to the Catholic school and they say, it's quite a bit better. Not perfect, but quite a bit better. You got private school, you got homeschooling. We could remain in the public school system and try to expand on that inclusivity if we can work together on that. And I have some tools that I'm going to share with you. And the faith community could be more involved in teaching sexual health directly to our children. Okay? So let's look at these three. First one, you're going to, leaving the school, you're going to hear about after I'm finished from other people. Okay? So let's focus on remaining in school and the parent forums. Okay? You as a parent can go to the school and say, my child needs to be accommodated for sex ed. This document, which is part of the Public School Boards Association, okay, it says we have to respect religious freedom. Part of that document says freedom of religion is an individual right and a collective responsibility. The board commits to work with the community and foster an inclusive learning environment. But it then says, it is expected that students and their families will help the board to understand their religious needs and will work with the board and its schools to determine appropriate and reasonable accommodations. This is the policy in every school board in the province of Ontario. But we have to take responsibility. So I created for you a sensitive curriculum information letter for Muslim families, okay? And it's a request to not to opt out right away, but to be informed of sensitive curriculum. And it only applies to sexual health education. And it just says, as a family, we adhere to the teachings of our faith. To assist the school, we have included, and see on the next page, a description of content from the curriculum that our faith could find sensitive. We are requesting to be informed about sensitive learning prior to planned instruction. Please keep in mind, if a student brings up a topic that's sensitive, the teacher has no control over that, okay? But this is planned instruction you want to be informed about. Accommodation could be as simple as, I'll talk to my child about it. Or if the planned learning includes content from which our faith requires us to abstain, or then exemption or an alternative learning activity may be necessary. So here's the form, the next page, and it has It says, I request, and you're supposed to, and it gives you a list of sensitive topics underneath this, and you check off which ones apply to you. And these are the topics that are sensitive in the curriculum. Now, on the page, it goes into further explanation that explains what's the problem with talking about masturbation, what's the problem with labeling genitalia, what's the problem with, but you go ahead and you check off all that apply. Then the next thing you need to do is you need to have a discussion with the teacher. Now, many of us sitting here go, oh, I need to talk about this with the teacher? I've had communities where they've worked together and the church brings all of the parent forums together, and then somebody, and we could train you to do this if you want, we'll call the principal up, call the teacher up, ask for a meeting, bring everybody together, and somebody will facilitate the discussion, okay? We had a very difficult time with Old Order Mennonites down in Leamington. We had 700 of these forms pulled together, and I said, don't go in and talk yet. We need to train somebody to go in and talk the right way. 2 Old Order Mennonite families went in and basically railed them and said, what are you perverts teaching my kids? And they were extremely rude. And guess what happened? Next principals meeting, superintendent of education said to all principals, we will have nothing to do with any church in our school board again. Principal said, wait a minute, we do our graduation ceremonies at the church down the street. No more. So we have to be careful how we act. Okay? All right. And I have a guideline here. If you want it, let me know at the back. I can send it to you by email, or we could do a seminar for parents on how to how to engage the school and how to communicate, etc. Okay? So how should we respond? Well, we're still in the Remain in the School. Well, what about offering alternative sexual risk avoidance programs? We've had this happen in a couple of communities in the States where parent groups have just gone in, expressed their concern, and said, oh, by the way, there's an alternative program. Here it is. Could we offer it? We made this proposal to the government of Ontario back when they did the sex ed review in 2019. We had we met with 22 MPPs. Every one of them said, this is a win-win situation. You're not imposing this curriculum on somebody else, you're providing options. But it didn't go anywhere because the bureaucrats that wrote the updated curriculum in 2019 were the same ones that wrote the original curriculum. But we've got that. We could help you if you want to do that. All right? Okay. And, whoops, here's the curriculum. This curriculum is the one that we use, and peer-reviewed studies of sexual risk avoidance is showing that students are more likely to delay sex. And if their kids are sexually active, they're more likely to discontinue. This program, grades 6 to 12, it's been used in over 500,000 students in the United States. It's been proven to reduce teen sexual activity by 67%. And we're using it here in Canada in churches. We're using it in schools in the States. Anyway, let's go on. So there is an option. There are also other sexual risk avoidance curriculum. Okay, next. What about parents instructing at home? Just really quickly, there is a book series. Now, this is what we give to Christian families. There's a book series called God's Design for Sex. And it's a storybook. Starts at age 3. Mommy, Daddy, tell me the story of me. And it's a storybook of how you came to be and why God created us this way, etc. And then it goes all the way up into the 8 to 12. Yeah, it talks about homosexuality and and how that's growing in society and what the problems are with it, etc. Again, God's design for how he created us the way he did. And over 1.5 million copies sold. We've got churches, they buy them for all of the families. Javed is saying, maybe we should write a series for our kids. Good idea. If you want to have a look at them, they're back there if you'd like to. Okay? So we said, leave the public school system. Remain in the public school system. Now, what can the faith community do? Well, we've got churches that are teaching the sexual risk avoidance program that I just described to you to their kids. All right? If you would like to get people trained It's not cheap, but once you get trained, you could get 2 teachers trained, and you could use them in different mosques all around the city. Teachers, teach your parents to guide their children in sexuality. We have a program called Building Family Connections. It's an 8-hour program. We come in over a series of, it could be a series of 8 weeks, and teach the parents how to guide and direct their kids on sexuality. And parents, you can assist positively to advocate in the school, build relationship, and we said build relationship and try to get an alternative program in the school. All right, conclusion. What's our goal? Well, our goal is to get our kids from the island of childhood to the shoreline of adulthood where they can achieve their goals. We have to, though, avoid the risky waters of the sex years. We have to guide and direct our kids. We have to provide them with the knowledge, the skills to be able to protect themselves and protect their future. So, sex is too important to God to leave to schools. What will you do? And we're here to help if we can. Thank you.